Hi, this is Lynn Schnebley with Educating with Wisdom, and I know it's late and it's dark, and I know this isn't looking too hot, but I just want to put a little thought out there because I'm reaching out now to women's groups, and I know as a woman, and until I learned certain things, and some of it has only been recently over the last couple of years, I had always felt a great deal of guilt about what happened to African Americans, and I still do. I mean, I don't really feel guilty anymore, but I feel sorry that these kinds of things happen, that these people were enslaved and brought over, and they were sold as part of a trade deal. I mean, the Africans were not innocent about this, and it's very difficult for African Americans to learn about what happened to them in Africa. Some of it was a European problem and some of it was us. But what the topic is really here is blaming white women for slavery. One, we have been slaves ourselves. I graduated from Seneca Falls, New York. I grew up as a feminist. I've done women's in history studies. I went to Wells College, and don't tell me women enslaved African people. That didn't happen. We didn't have freedom ourselves. We didn't. And women in the South, they didn't have a place they could run away to. There was no underground railroad. There was nobody that was sympathetic to what was happening to them. Their husbands slept with slaves and brought the children into the area. Now, there were many slave owners who were not necessarily bad to slaves. Lifetime slavery did not begin with white people, by the way. It began with Africa against Africa here in the United States. It's the Anthony Johnson, John Castor case. It happened in the latter part of the 1600s. It was an indentured African man who got his land and got his property and all of that after he served his time. And they're going to say, well, why was he indentured? He wanted to come over. Hey, they indentured everybody. But he got his land and his property. And then he had, I guess, 4 white slaves and 1 African slave or something like that. And when the African man had more than done his time and he had 2 white farmers that were willing to give him a better deal and help him be free, it was Anthony Johnson who went to court twice and finally succeeded in arguing and saying, he's my slave for a lifetime. So lifetime slavery did not begin in the United States or in the British Commonwealth until it was an African that did it to another African. There you go. And we had no rights. Gentlemen, we had no rights. Don't ask for us to give you payment. We had no rights. And I've always fought against injustice for my African American colleagues and my students. But we don't owe you anything, and it's time now that white women realize that we never gave our husbands license to go sleep with other people, unless, of course, we were dying and we couldn't have children, multiple pregnancies and things like that. These are extenuating circumstances, but other than that, the relationship that women had in the South with their husbands sleeping with slaves was heartbreaking, terribly drove the women crazy, and they had no place to go to. So there is this natural animosity, and I think it's time that we as women have that discussion, because that has been a major barrier between us and African American women, and it was not of our making. You see, in Christianity, well, in Islam and in Judaism, slavery is absolutely allowed, and men are allowed to sleep with their female slaves, period. There you go. You are, but not in Christianity. In Christianity, even if you have a slave, you have to treat them well. You have to treat them well, and you have to give them the ability to be freed, like indentured servitude. And in Christianity, you are not allowed to sleep with anyone other than your wife, your one wife. So you weren't allowed to sleep with your slaves. So our men who slept with their slaves, there was no, we were Freemason and they were businessmen, and this country has never been a Christian country. There you go. We give license to men to have pornography and everything like that, but Christ said no. And Christ said, no, you couldn't sleep with your slaves. And that was not an option. That's how the Nicolaitans feel. That's an option. Then you can go to heaven, but no. So, again, it's terrible what happened, but it's not our fault. And I think it's time as women we have this discussion because it's still happening in Africa and it's still happening here. Thank you. God bless. Goddess bless. Heaven bless.